So again, a bit about me. I have a background in material science. I worked in industry for about 30 years, actually, and ranging really from engineering to science, mostly in crystalline solids, and mostly those were wide bandgap semiconductors or electro-optical devices. So in that role, I had I had the opportunity. I had to, frankly, in order to fund my work and to fund my team, I had to apply for SBIR. So I got about 5 million over 5 years, mostly from Homeland Security. I was a nuclear detector person, but that funding bodies for us also included Department of Energy and Defense Threat Reduction Agency. So just to give you an idea remind you that you can go to multiple agencies to get the funding you need. And if I didn't get the funding, I was firing people. So I was really competitive about it. We're going to go over just some basics today, though. Just to open up, SBIR, just know it's just one of the sources for early stage funding. As you know, there's also nonprofits. All proposals are kind of the same. I think some things like I mentioned Gates here are very, very hard to win. But as you know, some incubators, there's like MIT 100K, like there's other sort of challenges. There's state grants. So there's a number of grants at the state level. The state agencies also have like manufacturing grants, and like there's the Core Labs grant, which is a really useful thing. There's internships. Obviously, customers is like just a great source of getting non-dilutive funding, either from a joint development agreement, right? Or a consulting agreement, or God bless if you can get a PO, right? Partners can be a great source of early stage funding. A lot of manufacturers will do in-kind work for you. And of course, there's friends, family, and angels. So I'm really speaking to these days when you're not quite ready for even seed funding from venture. Venture might say, well, this is interesting, but go back and do some more work and come back to us, right? So I really like this slide. As you see, this is 2016. It's a little outdated, but all of except for the numbers, which are, it's about 4 billion now that they put out. All the ratios are correct. So what we see here is, I think there's 13 participating agencies. This lists 12. So just understand that there's many, many participating agencies. For instance, medical, there's a medical consortium. So DOD can be a good funding of medical. DOD is also funded more in solar than Department of Energy when it comes to SBIRs. So DOD here is the bulk of the funding because SBIRs are given out as a proportion of their R&D budget. It's 3.4% of their R&D budget is set aside. This is do I have a little pop-up here? No, I don't. It's a 1982 law. So SBIR goes back to 1982. The other big one in the House is Health and Human Services that we commonly refer to as NIH. But that also includes the Center of Disease Control and the FDA. There it is. It's a 1982 law. It was passed under Ronald Reagan. You probably already know this. I think there's a range of know-how in this cohort here in this webinar, but the phase 1, this is really important. It's just to get to know you, period. We'll get into reasons people fail, but one of the reasons people fail sometimes the phase 1 is it's just too much. They're just like short and sweet, really tactical, really tight, right? They just want to get to know you. And then the phase 2, actually anywhere from 750 to 4 million. NIH will put out some really big phase 2s. The phase 3 is just a concept. It's just like whatever, you're commercial. That's just their own internal language. Of course, you can have, I had multiple going at the same time. Of course, I could not be more than 33% on each if I had 3 programs going. So you have to think ahead about that. But there's no double dipping. So if you do submit, say, to NIH and NSF, the same work plan, you can't accept both, and you win both, you have to turn one of them down or negotiate a change in the work plan. And it is a slow process. See my note here about 3 years. So it's really incumbent on you to think forward. This allows you to hire basically a PhD full time. It's really important for forwarding your work, but it's just a slow process. The first award can take, between the time you start writing it to the time you get awarded, it can take 9 months to a year. It is a law. It is a federal law. It's congressional law, right? So there's rules. You have to be less than 500 employees. That's pretty easy. You have to be a for-profit firm. And you have to be US owned. So we have a lot of immigrants in this nation who create startups. It's uncanny. It's very well studied and it should be celebrated. But anyways, just know that and this includes your venture funding. If you've got like a Singapore fund and a French fund and a Brazilian fund, and it's starting to add up, you're not eligible anymore. Oh, and say like a founder who's, also French or something, right? Your PI has to really be an employee. You don't have to work 51% of your time on the program. The PI has to only do 10% on the program, but has to really be 51% employed by that company. This creates a lot of problems around spin-outs, frankly. A lot of organizations like, say, Woods Hole or like MIT, they haven't really figured out the healthcare thing, because they only offer, I'm getting in the weeds here, but they only really offer healthcare if you're over 51% employed. So it leaves people in this healthcare trough or like benefits trough. So negotiate with your employer if you can. It's nice, particularly if you're just getting off the ground, it can be nice to have, 2 sources of income. And I should note that you don't need to really start doing payroll until the SBIR comes in. So for some of you, like in Cora, you got a Series A, you're up and running. But some people, that startup is sitting waiting 6 months, 8 months for that money to come in. So, and then 2/3 of the phase 1 and 50% of the phase 2 must be accomplished by the firm. Okay, so this is really tricky with contract research organizations. If you're a medtech or biotech focused firm, you know what I'm talking about. And this is US taxpayer money, so the work must be performed in the US. And then STTR, same exact law, strategic tech transfer, blah, 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 same exact law. It just means that there's actually, technically, it's a not-for-profit participation. So it could be someone like a FOA or something, but generally it's a university. And that is just a different level of participation. It's a little bit different organization to that. I slipped in this slide this morning that the current administration is trying other vehicles too. There's been a discussion sort of around our global competitiveness, and SBIR is seen as, the numbers in SBIR are really astounding what the multiplication factor have been. Some huge firms like Qualcomm started on SBIR. So they're trying to push more money onto non-SBIR vehicles. And then, of course, there's always, say, in NIH, there's always like R21s and things like that. Generally, SBIR is less competitive. So just when you see another vehicle, if you're looking on grants.gov, just really see who's eligible and just make sure you could be up against Intel, or you could be up against Johns Hopkins, or, and it's open to everybody. The competition obviously is extremely stiff, and I am not kidding you, they have law firms to help them submit these proposals. So just be careful. But ARPA-H has this new sprint thing. Army X-Tech Search is it's related to their SBIRs, but it's just sort of interesting process. DOE is putting out these new initiatives. I just picked up one, like carbon negative shot. So there's just DARPA is doing some smaller awards. DARPA is really hard to get, but just obviously they're out there. There's the CHIPS Act, right? And there's a lot going on around this area. There's the New England Micro Northeast Microelectronics Commons. So be aware of that if that's in your pocket. That's generally around really like photonic chips and just really intense stuff. So again, see grants.gov. Here's a little screenshot of grants.gov. I put a search on radar, say you got some new radar technology, it's going to list what are some open grants. You could do forecasted, posted, closed, archived. You can do some intel here too, like see who got funded, previously on something similar. So some of you already know this. This is kind of a crowded slide, but first you got to find your appropriate topic or agency. NSF and NIH and the Air Force AFWORDS have open topics. Some Navy topics are open now, but just research it. What does your customer want? Right? So that's like my number one bit of advice is like, it's not about you, it's about them. They're charged, these are huge national labs, huge federal agencies charged with solving the nation's problems. How are you helping them cross the finish line? Right? Who have they funded in the past? Right? So there's a lot of, most of their grant awards are to academic institutions. Surf around, like figure out. Like one time it took me like a month to figure out what a solicitation was referring to. It took me, a week's. I just researched and then I finally found the paper. It was out of Tennessee. And, this was, it was, if you want to know, mixed halide to pass the lights, but, it just took me a while to find it. But then I won the award because I could reference it. Another top bit of advice is email the program manager and bounce the idea if you can. Definitely NIH will take calls. NSF only has the project pitch process. If you guys have done NSF, you're familiar with this. The DoD will pick up the phone sometimes, but it has to be before 30 days of the solicitation close. And just listen carefully, shut up and listen. Right? And then other things you need to do is put together a great team, get letters of support. Big companies can be subcontractors. Universities can be subcontractors on SBIRs. You don't have to do a STTR with them. Gosh, I can't tell you how many times, like look at your calendars, how many times I've talked to people and it's just facepalm, like right before it's due, they're like, oh, everyone's on vacation. Like just make a plan, execute according to it. It's okay to submit early. It is very, it's very arcane and it's a bunch of, it's federal government stuff. So like you can't submit late. And just, it takes a long time to get the registrations in. So start those early, SAM, grants.gov, DSIP if it's military, ER Commons if it's NIH, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. DOD, Department of Energy is their own. And then I usually start with my budget. Like, what can I really do? So like now I've researched it. Now I have an idea what I want to do. What can I afford to do in phase one? And you want to sort of spiral back and forth between what you want to do and what you can afford to do. Right? Because you're going to have indirect costs. You're going to have some subcontractors. You're going to have some consumables. So just start massaging your plan. And just, gosh, again, if they say you're limited to 15 pages and you submit a 16-page PDF, you're just booted out. Like it's never even read, right? So their system will see it as non-compliant and you're just booted out, right? If the budget's non-compliant, generally they'll just boot you out. But if they like you, they might call you up and try to talk to you about it and negotiate with you. Before you submit, just get somebody to look at it. Just edit hard. Writing is hard. I struggle with it myself. And then submit at least one day early, if not a week, because these systems sort of break down. You get into like just stuff like little registration hiccups, and know that it's going to take about 100 hours. They're just, even though they say, oh, it's a 15-page proposal all in, it's 100 pages, it's 100 hours. There's so many certifications. But know that all registrations are free. Again, these are federal congressional programs. All of these people are paid for by your tax dollars. So they're free, they're online. Sometimes there's scams once you register on like grants.gov or ERA Commons, and they'll say, pay us, we'll do these things for you. Just ignore all that stuff. So what do reviewers look for? I mean, and so there's this whole, there's a sort of, this goes back to DARPA, I believe. So what, who cares, why you, right? But outside of those big three, right, just very clear writing. You really have to make sure the technology comes through, and it has to have significance and or impact. Sometimes if you're just very high impact, if it's not like the most amazing science, then you can win on that. But you have to substantiate your claims. You have to have $1 billion market. You have to have an unfair advantage. You have to have a really clear work plan. Often I recommend, again, start with your budget and the work plan. They're paying you for the work plan, right? You're actually become a vendor to the United States government when you win an award. So the work plan has to be clear. You should say who's doing it, how many hours. You should have a Gantt chart, like just very detailed. You should have a risks and mitigation. And they don't like virtual companies, so you should have appropriate equipment and people to work on it. And it's okay if you're at Lab Central. It's okay if you're at the BIC, right? That's fine. It just should be like, yeah, you're and it's okay if you're one person, actually. But make sure you have a team beyond like one person. Have some advisors or somebody. So again, why would you not win? It's because it's not innovative enough. You're not compliant. So I work with people on their SBIRs still. My day job is an investor. I'm a VP investments at MassVentures, but I still work with people on their SBIRs because it's very important to MassVentures to support it. So number one thing I look for is just compliance, right? Because again, you just get booted. As I noted earlier, there can be like, again, technical detail in the work plan. I mentioned earlier, don't be too ambitious. Miss deadline, like this is an important one. Understand the state of the art. So their dream come true is that they funded university work, and they often fund it for like, I mean, how long has AI been funded? It's been funded, as far as I can recall it being funded back in the 80s, right? So these things get funded for a really long time, and then they become commercial, and they have to go to Congress and justify their existence. Why does NSF exist, right? And they get to say, well, we funded AI in the 1980s, and now look, right? So anytime you can tie the line to past funding that they did, even if you're referencing a paper, particularly if you're licensing technology from a university, just, NSF is specifically asks you to call that out, but just know that, be aware of the state of the art, be complimentary, even to startups that failed in the area. If they were SBIR funded, like, just be nice about it. Having a credible team, bad writing. We're gonna sometimes if there's a specific topic, there's a thing called being non-responsive. So if the topic's about radars and you're not talking about radars, then that's being unresponsive. I really, I pulled some of these out because I think they're hilarious, but it also gives you some idea of how difficult or how tough these reviewers are. They really don't like bad writing. You're making their life very hard. But they're also like, gee, I guess you don't care about your proposal, right? It just makes a very bad impression. And then they'll pick up on any sort of technical problems, This charge density is unrealistic. You're like, okay. So they're scientists and they know what they're doing. But know too that like the typical reviewer, it's 11 o'clock at night, the baby's crying, they have a stack of 10 to review, make their job easy. Like tie the lines, make it readable. Again, so I'll bring this home and I'll repeat a few things here. Again, interview the program manager. That's probably the number one thing you could do besides following the directions. And to this point about being 11 o'clock at night and the baby's crying and they're tired, but like you got 2 pages to get their attention, right? And so you're like, Stacey, why is there a big picture of a crystal here? Well, that was often on my like 2 pages. And it's just this light purple, very clear crystal. This is actually europium doped strontium iodide. It's a scintillator for nuclear detection. And you could see it has a really weird index of refraction, because why can we see the bottom of it there? But not a lot of teams, probably only 2 groups could industrially make something like this. We were perhaps the only ones at that time. So I was like, front page news, like, we're very credible. And like, boom, drop the mic. Don't make them wait to find out who you are. It will feel like bragging, because to us scientists and engineers, when we just talk about ourselves, it can feel like bragging. But hey, if GE is your partner, page 1. If you went to Harvard, page 1. Just find a way to get all that goodness in there, okay? Use active language when you can, because science is in the past, right? And so you're taught as PhDs and stuff to be like very passive language because it's in the past. But your program is in the future. So just try to have a balance there. So it comes across as, if you're not excited, like they're not excited, right? And I always say, like, it's a program and not a project. Projects are for art students, okay? And like I said in the last slide, connect the innovation to a past agency funding, and especially if it was that agency, but even if it was like, oh, Department of Energy funded this in the past, we want to pick it up with NSF, like that's fine. Like just tie the line. And again, plan appropriately. It takes a long time. Frequently asked questions. Can I use an outside writer? Yeah, some are great. Some are really not. My question to you is, why do you want to hand off your first and most important sale? So inspect your own thinking on this. If that's how you think your startup's going to go, that you could just be like, someone else will handle the sales, you will fail. Sales is the hardest thing, and it's honestly the most important thing you can do all the time, whether it's a SBIR, whether you're raising funds, whether you're talking to your manufacturer and trying to get them to do something for you for no money. So I'm a big fan of digging in, at least for the first one. If you have a plan to write many, then this is like an actual corporate strategy. And yeah, like you should plan for that, have a contractor in your organization, or, choose one of these firms, like the Ava Garlands, or, and then, move forward appropriately, but just be intentional about it. Okay, IP and patents. Yes, this is why this SBIR law works and why it's one of the most successful programs that the US government has ever done, ever. The only challenge is if you have an STTR and you're working in a university, they might ask you to split any IP that was developed in the SBIR 50-50. There are ways around this, like just give them measurements or nothing that impactful to do, right? You may not use SBIR funding for patenting, but there's a thing called TABA. Write a note about that. Always take it when you can get it. It can, like $50K in a phase 2, technical and business assistance. They will say, use our firms for doing this, but you don't have to use their firms. You can say, no, I am going to use Wilson Sansini, or who's the lawyer with us? Use her firm. So you can always put in your own vendor. It just requires a little bit of justification. Proposals are not public disclosure. There's often a little public disclosure sentence, so craft that carefully. However, they are subject to Freedom of Information Act. And particularly I find, oh, you naughty, like biotech people, you guys will FOIA each other's SBIRs. So that is something that should be disallowed when it's competitive intelligence, but these administrators and these agencies are just handling FOIA requests. So you have to avoid that, you have to mark pages and figures confidential as appropriate. Please have a balance, because if everything's marked confidential, they can't share it with their peers. And I've had people in the Navy say, I really want to talk to the guy down the hall about this. This would be so awesome, but I can't because everything's marked confidential. So try to balance it. That is it. Where might I find more information? I have 6 videos in gruesome detail on this thing called accelerator.massventures.com. So that is under MV Accelerate. We have different tabs. You have to sign in, but then you could just surf around, and there's tons of learning videos there. We interview smart people. Like one of my interviews is a program manager who worked at NSF. So you get to hear the NSF view of things. SBIR.gov is awesome. Tons of learnings there. If you have a weird question about accounting or ownership or STTRs, they have videos. And then also there's a whole search bar, and you can see what all your competition has been up to without FOIA. So you see their public disclosures, how many awards they've won, what they've won, who's funded what in the past, obviously grants.gov. And then for the military, they have this site, DoD SBIR STTR. It's often called DSIP. And then you can email me. And there's also an SBIR request form on our website. Dan Lilly is at the Massachusetts Small Business Development Center. I highly recommend working with him as well. I'm free, he's free, and the PTACs are free. If you're looking at military, you can look at the PTACs as well. So they sometimes are familiar with SBIR, sometimes they're not. Those people rotate in a little bit more frequently. But yeah, and then last final note is that our START program offers matching grants to phase 2 winners. This is a program, I just want to drop a hint with you. It opens, I should put it, every February 1st. This is a Massachusetts state grant that is made available to you. There is more on the MassVentures website about the START grant. Table stakes, you have to be a phase 2 winner. We just are wrapping up our 2024 session for START. We have 17 winners every year.